Welcome to Teams Tuesday. It's September the 15th, 2020. It's 12:15 Eastern Standard Time. We have a great speaker, Born Ekens, who's discussing Teams governance automation at scale. I'm your host, Peter Ward from New York City. Stay tuned for the next 45 minutes. It's Teams Tuesday.
So what I wanted to talk to you guys out there today about is kind of how or what we learned about governance, especially for teams. Runcor have started with this product as we have, but then in my role, I'm our business developer. My role is to find out what people are struggling out there currently with other topics. And so we had a look at how people currently do governance. And I think, more than 150 research calls with consultants and customers and MSPs to try to figure out the space, right? So what is Teams and Office 365 governance? What we figured out is, first, it's kind of, you need to get information about your environment. We talk a little bit later of how you can do this. Then you need to apply your governance plan to it. Oftentimes, the governance plan currently is a piece of paper that you need to apply to that. You need to build reports around the data that you find when it comes to governance, and then you finally need to act, right? So these are kind of the steps described by the people that we interviewed. How do people manage this out of the box currently? So when we take a little bit, maybe take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, and we're not talking only about Teams, and we are talking more about M365 per se. Then what people use to manage this out of the box is they go to the different admin centers, which are separated, obviously, and they look at the static report provided by these admin centers. Downside of that is it's kind of limited the insights that you get. You need to go to these different admin centers to get all of that information because you don't get it at one place, and the reports are not actionable, right? You can't enforce actions with these reports. There is the possibility to automate some of these things, but this requires custom work to build and maintain. You all know about PowerShell scripts and these kind of things. It requires extensive knowledge because you need to stay on top of things. Microsoft constantly changes, and you really need to stay on top of things so that you actually pick up the right stuff. And what we learned in the research is that not a lot of people out there are really happy with that out-of-the-box functionality, so they do-it-yourself governance. That's how we termed it after talking to all these people. How is that do-it-yourself governance looking like? Again, we have the admin centers, the different ones. If you want to govern more than only Teams, you want to govern maybe Power Automate as well, SharePoint, Azure. And now people ask consultants, or they do it themselves, to write PowerShell scripts to gather the data out of these different admin centers, and the output, or where this is put into, is oftentimes Excel or SharePoint list, right? And then once this data has been collected, people want to act on the data. So what does that mean? I maybe find out, hey, I have a bunch of teams that only have one owner, but my governance plan says every Teams team should have at least 2 owners, right? Or I have teams with private channels. I actually don't want this, or I want to talk about this. All right. I now need to send emails to these owners or users that I detect, right? I have to manually prepare reports for meetings, maybe with my different stakeholders. Maybe I'm an IT admin for Teams, and my stakeholders, the security team or whoever, asked me for different reports, and now I have to crunch this data to prepare reports for meetings. I have to remove unused resources, so we have this whole life cycle management aspect of things. Maybe I find inactive or unused teams, I want to get rid of them, I have to remove them, and then as a last step I need to stay on top of these things, track the progress of actions. Peter, you wanted to say something, I guess.
Yeah, this whole word about governance, about SharePoint sprawl, this has been kicking around, particularly with SharePoint, for the last, since like day one. And so this is very much old wine in new bottles. Like everyone talks about how do you control, and the word governance sounds very much like policing, which kind of like scares people. But like in a nutshell, I would say the word governance is very much more about like how do we keep the car on the road at a speed that we're comfortable with.
Exactly. And I think governance is about to find this middle ground, that you actually open up the system so that your end users and your business can actually do their work, right? Because if you limit everything, then they won't be happy. They can do their work properly, but you need to be able to kind of control that whole thing. So you want to open up, but still be in control so that it doesn't all go to hell, right? Because there's no sense for opening it up and then people create 1 trillion teams, for example. They don't find the right information. They share stuff with externals, which maybe could be shut down at some point, and these kind of things, right? So you need to have a means to stay on top of these things. And I think that's what governance is about. So we're talking about do-it-yourself governance. The downside of do-it-yourself governance is that it requires extensive experience and ongoing education, right? We talked about PowerShell scripts. You need to stay on top of what Microsoft is doing. Things change here and there. Your scripts break. You need to fix them, and so on and so on. It is expensive to build and maintain. So that's an aspect as well. I talked to a lot of kind of bigger enterprises in this process of doing our research. And by trying to build a proper process themselves, they spend a lot of money on doing so, and maintaining costs a lot of money as well. It distracts IT from facilitating business. What do I mean with that? I had several examples of IT admins I talked to, and they told me, hey, I get these different questions from my stakeholders around certain reports. And if you remember here now, I find all of that stuff in the admin centers, put it into SharePoint lists, but then I need to kind of mine this data to create these reports and provide the stakeholders with that report. The normal IT admin doesn't have time to do that. It's easy as this. And so a lot of IT admins told me we have to say no a lot of time to the business if they ask for some reports because we just can't produce it for them. We don't have the time. And then the final bit is that came from a lot of consultants. They need to build the same PowerShell over and over again, and it just doesn't, oftentimes doesn't make sense. Specific teams concerns. So we recently at Runcor had this Teams Governance Summit. So we had Joanne Klein, who's another MVP, as a speaker there, and leading up to the event, she asked that question on Twitter, what you can read here. What is your concern around Microsoft Teams in your tenant? And I collected some of the answers because I think they're quite valuable to see. And then finally, another thing, I think that is something that we hear a lot when it comes to governance.
You can't saying that because it's almost like with security, you can kind of like see it and identify it. With governance, is it fair to say you can't necessarily? You probably see it and identify when it's too late.
I guess that's another discussion, right? So we have this this early on governance when it comes to provisioning, I guess, right? You have your governance rules that you set up during provisioning, and then you want to make sure that people do things a certain way. And then you have this kind of after the fact governance, which obviously should be done on a regular basis. So I guess what you are asking is, hey, if I govern my tenant after 1 year on the basis that it's lacking a lot of time between things are getting done and I don't govern, then that could become a problem, right? So I think you need a system that constantly monitors your tenant for governance violations that you defined in your governance plan. I think that's the way that should be done.
True.
So when we did these research calls, I always asked, what are your biggest concerns when it comes to governance for teams? And I put together a list of maybe top 10 Teams governance challenges. I can tell you that I have a lot more in our backlog for our product that we will show you in a second, but these are things that oftentimes were mentioned. So I guess it's the lifecycle management discussion, unused teams with channels. It's kind of this discussion around orphaned teams, so the teams with less than 2 owners. I guess that policy or rule is there to prevent having only 1 owner, then he is gone and then the team doesn't have an owner anymore. And then we have the whole thing around without owners, disabled owners, which is kind of the same thing. Then something about similar names, teams that do not match naming conventions, which would be, hey, I can't find relevant information. Guests in teams, we already talked about that being maybe a risk, or at least I want to be informed about where I have guests, if they are still necessary and so on. Connectors, private channels, bots. So these were all things that were mentioned a lot based on our research. To kind of show where we stand. We are still in beta for a new product that we are doing, which is called Runcor Governance. All right, so we are talking about Teams governance, but what we plan to do with Runcor Governance is a little broader. So we plan to be kind of the platform that allows you to govern all Microsoft services. So what we start with is Power Automate, Teams, SharePoint, and Office 365 groups, and then we will expand the scope to Power Apps, Azure, OneDrive, Planner, and all of these different things. Because what did we find out when I talked about this in the presentation in our research? We found out it sucks for people to go to these different admin centers. They want to have it all in one place. So that's what we're trying to be kind of the data aggregator. When you land in our tool, we have kind of these 4 menu points, right? We have the dashboard section, that's where we land. And in the dashboard has 2 purposes. One is it's kind of your cockpit where you see, hey, all green, or hey, there's something red, I need to take care of something. So that's the right-hand side, kind of this, what we call checks in our lingo, that are the governance rules that you put into place and now want to see if you violate or someone violates these governance rules, and then you can do something with that, which I will show you in a second. And on the left-hand side, we have inventory data around certain things that you might be interested in. So you might want to see certain inventory data that you can put into this tile here and then dig deeper and so on and so on. The other purpose of the dashboard section is, remember again, when I did the presentation, I found out it's very hard for people to build reports for stakeholders. That's what you can do in the dashboard section. So you can create own dashboards. You could put what we call tiles, so reports that we already pre-configured for people in there, or you can create custom tiles based on governance rules that you created, based on inventory data, or based on you can create advanced tiles where you can do whatever you like. I won't go into details here because I only want to give you kind of an overview, and then if you're interested, you can chat me up afterwards. So coming from the overview dashboard, seeing, hey, I need to act, I see, I have 45 high violations, let's click them, and it brings me to my checks page. Again, the checks are our governance rules, and in this system, we already set some governance rules up, and these have been violated. Before I go into them, let's see how you can create a governance rule. And as this is the Teams meetup, let's talk about Teams. So how we work is we have a checks template library, which makes it really easy for you guys to get started. So you just choose one of these. Let's go to Teams. For example, I want to have a look at inactive teams. I use this template. I see if data is displayed, I would see it here. I see my filters, days without activity greater than 90. I say, well, for me, 45 days. I apply the filter, give it details, and then this check has been done. I won't go into that yet. If you don't find a check that is fulfilling your needs now, it will hopefully be there in the future. We have a backlog of like 70 checks that we will build out pretty soon once this version 1 is live. but if you don't find something, you can create your own custom check where you can do whatever you like, building that out. But that needs a little bit more knowledge. If I now have built a check, that's what you already show here. We show you the violations. So maybe you have teams with very few owners. When you click this, you get kind of the details around this. You can dig into the different things, in this particular example, the team, Contoso sales. You have all the properties, kind of the info surrounding that team. And what we are still doing is we're building out that page again. So what we will do here is giving you the information surrounding that team, so you can make an educated decision. And then on the right-hand side, we would give you jumping off points like, okay, that is the team, that's the link, and you can go to the team, that's the team owner, you can contact him, and so on and so on. But this is still kind of manual, right? So yeah, would be a manual approach, right? You would define governance rules, and then, okay, it would be automated thing that you get these violation alerts, and then you can see the details. But what do you do with that stuff? You want to maybe automate that, right? So if I want to automate this for every governance rule that I have in place, I can add an automation. And what we will do here is we integrate into different services to provide you with flexibility, because that's something that we learned from the research. People want to be really flexible. They don't want us to do notifications or automations for them. They want to be able to do that themselves. So we are providing integrations, which two different things. They are rather notifications. So for example, I can trigger an email if a governance rule has been violated. I can trigger a Teams notification to a certain channel if a rule has been violated, but I can do more powerful stuff as well.
Where's the data stored?
What's that?
Where's the data stored? Does this have to go into your environment, or is it all stayed? Your application, it's getting its tentacles into the tenants. Okay, so is that bringing the data outside the tenants or not?
This is a trigger that triggers an Azure function that works at the customer or at the user, that triggers a Power Automate that is at the user side. So that's not something we do. We are a software as a service solution. So you would connect to our application. We would run analysis on your tenant. You would define your checks. We would see what kind of violations can come up. And then for the violations, you can define what should be triggered. And then this thing here lives at the customer.
Right. Okay.
And then if I haven't answered the question properly, the next thing is obviously it could be that some bigger organizations say, "Ooh, I don't want to connect to a software as a service application. I don't want to run in the Azure subscription of Runcor, this stuff." But we will give people the possibility to run it in their own Azure subscription as well. So kind of a self-hosted approach, but that will come in the future. All right, cool. So I was talking about these automations. So you guys know then you can do whatever you want with that. So Power Automate probably is the one that comes to mind that is very powerful. So you could do a lot of stuff here. Let us have a look at quickly to work through that example. If I want to do email, for example, hey, I have now for checks teams with very few owners, my check that I created, I want to trigger whenever I find a violation, or as a summary, maybe I want to trigger an email. And then we provide you kind of with an email template and placeholders so that it pulls dynamic data. And then I could send this. So this is more a notification. I would send this to the team's general responsible person or the service desk or the governance guy or whoever, right? So that wouldn't be the proper automation. It would be a notification. But then for the automation, as I said, that could then be triggering a Power Automate, and then you could do whatever you want to. So that's kind of the governance rules automation thing. I talked about dashboards briefly. So I guess I have provided you with a brief overview. Peter, do you have any questions? Should I go into depth on something?
What's the key pain point this resolves, your tool resolves?
I think the key pain point it resolves is providing people with full flexibility to do governance and to do it very easy, because we have all of these different checks templates that will grow a lot over time, so people can just click their governance rules together. They don't need to have a lot of knowledge around putting like scripts together, getting the data and all of that stuff. So we make it really easy to do governance in that tool. And then the other thing is this flexibility of I can handle my governance violations as I like by us giving you the possibility to trigger what you like, an email, a Teams notification, a Power Automate, an Azure function. So you can really build that into your process. So it's kind of our sweet spot. Easy to use, full flexibility. We're kind of a Lego system.
Understood. Okay, so you talked about governance for, did you say governance for Power BI? Did you mention that, or was it Power Apps?
So we will do, at one point, we will do Power BI as well, but the next thing coming will be Power Apps.
Okay, and also the other thing as well, like, can you, how does this integrate with E3 and E5 security? So like sensitivity labels and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's something that we are looking at. So there was a requirement from a lot of folks that they want to say, hey, I want to, with your system, for example, I applied some sensitivity labels. For example, that is confidential, right? And then in your system, I now want to build a governance rule, for example, hey, show me all the stuff with sensitivity label confidential. And then for this thing, I do a certain rule. So that will be definitely something that we will do in the future. Currently, we don't have it, but it's on the roadmap.
Understood. Understood indeed. Does this product work on-prem?
It doesn't work on-prem. It works in Azure currently. And as I said, two options. Either it runs in our Azure subscription at Runcor, or it runs in the customer's Azure subscription or the consultant's Azure subscription. On-prem, it doesn't work.
I'm assuming, because one of the things with governance is that people kind of like don't know what to govern. So sometimes what they think they know. So they're probably going to need to have some kind of an educational process, or with you, I suspect, aren't they?
Well, so that's the cool thing about these check templates or these governance rule templates, right? So these governance rule templates, what we call checks, that we offer, they all come from the conversations that we have with consultancies and with end customers, that they tell us what are the most important governance rules to you. And so we kind of get these ideas for them, and then we build them out. And so we will kind of offer, so these check templates are there. So it's really easy to put them into place. And we think we will sell predominantly through consultancies as well, that act as kind of the educators to the customer, that they say, hey, dear customer, you're a mid-sized company that recently introduced Teams. You're working in the education system. What we see at our customers are they put these governance rules into practice, and then you guys set the system maybe up for the customer if they are not fit to put the governance rules into place. So that's how we envision that.
What are the top 3 governance rules?
So when it comes to Teams, I think I showed you the list of the top 10.
Yeah.
What we heard a lot. I guess it's a little specific to the different needs of each organization, right? So if I introduce a new service, so let's say I introduced Teams, or I introduced Power Automate or whatever, then it depends a little bit of what I want to do. What we hear a lot when it comes to Power Automate is that a lot of people want to look, for example, at flows that use premium licenses, flows that use premium connectors, because it's the cost discussion. So I want to be informed if I have to pay more, these kind of discussion. Mm-hmm. Another thing is kind of this risk security aspect, I guess, is different connectors that I use. So I don't want to have the possibility whenever the CEO writes an email that it gets tweeted, and you could easily build this out with Power Automate. So maybe there are different connector connections that I want to monitor. Mm-hmm. And then I guess what I hear a lot from people recently is kind of all of this external stuff, right? Like guests in Teams, guests in SharePoint, external sharing, and all of that stuff coming back to our discussion, I want to open up the system, but I want to control if I'm not putting myself at risk by sharing too much stuff with or giving too much access to externals. So that's a big thing as well.
Right. What type of department people should be involved with the governance policy outside IT?
How we see the tool that I demo today, it is a tool for IT admins and IT pros and consultants. They would do the governance with that. And then the end users that would consume maybe reports would be the different stakeholders that need to get reports. So maybe then, if I understand the question right, so that could be, I'm a guy that wants to drive adoption for teams. I don't know who I would be as a user then, and I'm not within IT. But if I would be a user that has to look, hey, here, this thing needs to be adopted, then I certainly would be interested to get the right kind of reports. Hey, are people actually setting up teams? Are they creating teams? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? So that then would be people that I would involve in that governance conversation, I guess.
Right.
Security teams, obviously. I guess that we talked a lot to security people as well that are concerned about certain things. Again, external sharing, guests, these kind of things. So they should be involved, I guess. Yeah.
So in terms of regulated bodies like FINRA or HIPAA, I'm assuming you work a little bit, this tool maps onto that quite well.
I guess so in the future. Currently, we didn't look at these different regulating things that we use that kind of for marketing yet. But I guess, obviously we should look at different standards to see how we could help like governmental agencies or highly regulated industries to make sure that they actually can adhere to these policies, right? I think that is something that we should definitely address, yeah.
All right, okay. All right, we're almost on the hour. I think we're out of questions. Mm-hmm. So, Bojan, thank you for your time.
No worries. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.